Oh, I've been recording this whole time. Awesome. Hi, and welcome back to the sequel that nobody asked for. This is The Toad Theory Mini Lesson Part 2. Go find Part 1 if you haven't watched it. This will make even less sense than it will if you have seen Part 1. Again, we're talking research methods. This is specifically geared towards the last essay of the semester, whether you're in EN 100 or in the EN 102. This is me trying to familiarize you with the kinds of research that I'm most interested in seeing on this last essay. Once again, you can use this as a short assignment. Some of you have already figured out that these can be pretty easy. Take 5 minutes, pause the video, send me your response. If you want to use that, that'll definitely count towards one of the 15 homework assignments if you're shooting for a B or higher in either class. Again, I'm going to give you the heading of how we know stuff as the name of this unit or the name of this particular issue. If you're thinking about going to a 4-year university, I'd put a little parentheses and write down something about epistemology or the epistemological study of knowing. But basically, if your brain was a library, how does the stuff that gets in your brain get there? In other words, how do you know the things that you know? How did you build your knowledge base if you were born as a clean slate? Where did all of the things you believe, true or not, come from? As a basic review from part 1 of the mini lesson, main point I was trying to make there is that all research really is qualitative. We acknowledge that there are facts out there, but I'm going to claim that all research is qualitative and that it's still you deciding which sources you trust for which kinds of information, and all sources are not created equally. So that process of deciding who you trust or what authority figures you're going to put your faith in is a qualitative process. So I'm claiming that all research in that way is qualitative. I think it's helpful to talk about knowing as a technical term, like how do you know a fact versus just have a suspicion or a theory or a belief. I like the idea of using betting odds because it's an easy way to think about your level of confidence, how well you know something or how confident you are in a belief. So I might say something like, I'm 99.9% confident that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, right? Maybe a meteor hits, maybe the sun is just a figment of my imagination and I'm a butterfly dreaming that he's a man in a parallel universe, but I feel very strongly. I feel like I can say that tomorrow is going to be another day and the sun will show up with something like a higher than 99% degree of confidence. So when I say knowing, I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on that term and what that term means in this context. So just to make one more point about knowing versus having a suspicion or a theory, if you want to talk about the difference between thinking he's cheating on you versus knowing he's cheating on you, I like that because it illustrates the idea that you need to be above a certain threshold of confidence to want to act without consequences. In other words, initially you'd want to have a high degree of certainty about your belief that he or she is cheating on you before you moved or did any action on the basis of that belief. So again, for the purposes of this lesson, knowing means a very high degree of confidence in that actual reality. So if you really try to think literally about this, you have to, again, pretend your brain is a library, and all the books in that library came from somewhere. All the beliefs that you have, all of the preconceived notions, everything that you know about the world came from somewhere. This isn't a comprehensive list of places you may have learned stuff, but it's pretty close, and it's kind of in order. So starting with your family, of course, they're going to be they're the earliest to start filling your brain with beliefs, preconceived notions, etc. Obviously, your peers are going to be hugely influential. One of the big conflicts about parenting is watching the peer group gradually take over the family group in terms of where you get your information or what you take seriously. The media is a big one. I'm using that to include everything from news, fake news, entertainment, books, for those of you that still read. Oh, how quaint. Social media deserves its own whole separate lesson and its whole separate category or umbrella. Scientists, I'm using that as a stand-in for any institutional expert. So any expert that either comes out of a university, an organization, or an institution where their knowledge is important to the survival of that institution. Hey, there's me. I'm in the list right now. Your teachers, your religious instructors, and your religious texts, you or somebody else's government. That's an important one, not in that you necessarily trust it as a source, but if you know that the speed limit on the thruway is 65 miles an hour, you can say, I know that as a fact. I have a high degree of confidence that the speed limit on the I-90 is 65 miles an hour. So that's a pretty big, pretty inclusive one as well. Could be your own institution. Scientists, again, I'm claiming as the experts within an institution, but you belong to institutions, things like the military, any kind of organization that you belong to through school. So we're just looking for an institution that would put information in your brain. I deliberately put you as a first-hand human being with observations and empirical sensory input at the end. The reason it's at the end, I think I mentioned this last lesson, is because most of us overemphasize how well we know the world through our five senses. Don't forget, the most unreliable witness to bring to a court case is a eyewitness, somebody who saw it so they know what actually happened. So I'm thinking of this as a pretty close to comprehensive list of places where you got the information that you believe about the world. So in other words, your own beliefs, your own set of facts that you know about the world were probably some combination of these sources. If you can think of another one that didn't show up in the list, throw that in the homework. Might have some extra credit points. But I am claiming that between your first-hand experience and all these other authorities or all these other sources, it's going to be a hodgepodge of those that give you any absolute belief that you have about the world. So let me give you an example of how I'm using this list, just so when we get to the writing exercise, you can kind of see how I'm plugging concepts into this list. Let's take a theoretical belief that you have, so something you think you already know about the world, and see how much consistency we get. I'm going to do the low-hanging fruit here and pick the round earth theory. So hypothetically, go along with me and let's suppose that you believe that the world is round. So that's something you know with a high degree of confidence. You might say, I'm 99.9% sure the world is round. I would bet a lot of money on it. Let's see how much consistency we get. Maybe your parents got you into the round earth theory early. That was a belief that they had, so you're already thinking that direction. You end up at school, and a lot of your peers also seem to confirm this round earth idea. The media, for all the fake news and sensational stories that are out there, most major media outlets will agree with this round earth idea. Social media, bit of a weak spot, bit of a chink in the armor, but we'll come back to that. Scientists seem fine with the round earth. I'm a teacher saying the earth is round, and many teachers will. Your religious instructors are totally fine with it. They may debate how old the earth is, but most religious instructors seem to agree that the shape of the earth is round. The government, by way of NASA, is very confident. NASA is a government organization. They say the earth is round. Your institution, hey, my school agrees with that. The military is fine with the round earth theory because that's how GPSs work if you're trying to locate a target. And first-hand experience, we could play horizon games, or you could say, well, the earth looks flat. But those are the only two contradictions. The earth looks flat just with your eyes, and you've got some pockets of social media, like the Flat Earth Society, but that still gives you a lot of consistency. So I would feel very confident saying the earth is round because I'm getting a lot of consistency from a variety of different authorities or different sources. So at this point, I'm just making the claim that most of what you believe about the world didn't really come from first-hand experience. It came from learning about the world through other sources, through a hodgepodge of official sources like school, and then things you might have just picked up through cultural osmosis. The actual writing exercise that I'm going to have you try will be me presenting you with a theory. So I'm going to give you a belief and then see if you could disprove the theory. So your job here is to think about how confident are you in what I'm saying, and then if you had to disprove me, if you had to argue in the negative, would you be able to do it? So there it comes. So the actual writing exercise is just going to be, I describe the toad theory. I'm going to explain how it works and how it causes gravity. And in your head, you're just assessing a baseline agree or disagree stance, whether or not you more or less agree or disagree with me, and what level of confidence that you feel that I'm either right or wrong in my premise. So here it is, the actual explanation of what causes gravity. Billions of years ago, the Earth was all molten lava, still forming, crust wasn't fully there yet, and inside that molten lava, there was a giant toad. The giant toad became encased in that magma, so that means the toad has been inside liquid magma for billions of years, and he's very hungry. and that it is the toad's eternal hunger that actually causes everything to be pulled towards the toad. First of all, I can prove that I'm right empirically. Every time I let the pen go, it goes towards the toad, so I have empirical evidence that there's a giant toad at the center of the earth. Now, of course, this is only an artist rendering of the toad. Nobody's ever actually seen the toad because nobody can go inside the earth and penetrate that much molten magma. So you'll never actually see the toad, but of course, human beings have always been interested in gravity and interested in exploring through artistic representations. So sometimes you'll see the toad presented through history in a positive light. Here you've got a toad kind of helping somebody out, the eternal toad kind of guiding people through life. You'll find other cultures that think of the toad as something more threatening or more intimidating. So here you've got a toad being used in a warfare scenario with goblins utilizing the toad as a military weapon. Some cultures will go as far as to make the toad an antagonist, like gravity kills many people each year, right? If you fall off a building, it's gravity that kills you. So some cultures are intimidated by the idea of the toad, so they present the toad as an enemy to be vanquished, or an antagonist that could actually cause people harm, or in some cases death. So it depends on which culture you're talking about, how they're going to perceive the giant toad. Some cultures see the toad as a purveyor of wisdom, so they conceptualize the toad as somebody powerful but also wise that you could seek assistance from. If you talk about some Asian cultures, Japanese in particular, they worship the toad not only for its power but also specifically its wisdom and the extent to which it might be able to bring good fortune through understanding. Of course, as you can imagine, since the toad has been around since way before human beings came on the scene, the toad is an object of fascination and in some cases almost borderline religious reverence. Like there are toad cults and there are cultures that kind of assume that the second coming may look something like this. But before we get too far afield into the religious or metaphysical implications of the giant toad at the center of the earth, don't forget you can bring it back to science and to the more literal realm and talk about things like it's the toad's agitation and hunger that attracts everything towards the toad at the center of the earth. That also explains things like seismic disruptions and tectonic shifts. So once you understand this enough, you realize that things like volcanoes exploding are really just the toad at the center of the earth being very gassy. I'm sure a subset of you already knows that there are certain toads that have skin that if you extract the poison from that skin and put it through a chemical process, you get some powerful hallucinogens. So of course some cultures will take that towards the more spiritual, metaphysical implications because the toad can bring enlightenment and great understanding of one's inner mind. All right, to review, what's the premise so far? Gravity is caused by a giant toad that is encased in magma at the center of the earth. It is the toad's eternal hunger that is the attractive, strong force that draws everything towards the center mass. But there's some implications here. If everything that has mass has gravity, albeit a very, very microscopic amount, you have mass, therefore you have gravity, therefore somewhere inside you is also a tiny little toad as well. There's your basic premise. So I'm giving you the explanation and the cause of gravity. So if you want to actually go ahead and do the writing exercise, it's really as simple as, if you had to prove me wrong, what would your plan be? That's different than argue in the negative. I'm not asking you to create an argument against the giant toad theory, which I'm telling you is true. If you had to prove me wrong in a court of law, or there was money riding on it, how would you put your case together? So in other words, you're trying to describe the procedure or the sources that you'd use to try to prove me wrong about the giant toad that is in fact at the center of the earth. So if you want to take 5 or 10 minutes right now, pause the video, I'll go get myself a Pepto-Bismol shake, and then when I come back, we'll talk about the implications. Okay. So, if you actually tried the writing exercise, it was simply a variation on this question. If there was money riding on it, could you disprove my toad theory without pointing to an authority figure? Let me give you the spoilers first. You cannot. It's impossible. First of all, you can't drill to the center of the Earth because nobody can. Like, humans have never gotten more than a couple miles in. So there's no opportunity to say something like, well, I don't see the toad, I can't experience it with my five senses, therefore I know it doesn't exist. So the main point to make there is that if you really think this problem through, you can't prove me wrong by yourself. You have to point to an authority figure and say, I trust the scientists on this one, or I trust my parents when they say that there's no giant toad at the center of the Earth. And think about how frequently you're doing that in life. Consciously, you might be in school trying to know certain things like facts and figures, but unconsciously your brain is doing this all the time, taking on certain pieces of information through confirmation bias, discounting certain other pieces of information through the Dunning-Kruger curve, and this process is happening. The metacognitive approach is just trying to be aware that the process is happening in real time so you can make better choices about how you consume information. On the off chance that any of you are intrigued by this enough to want to do some follow-up research, I borrowed a lot of this from Bertrand Russell, who was a philosopher who came up with the teapot orbiting the sun theory. So I came up with the toad theory to explain gravity. He made the claim that if there was a teapot orbiting the sun right now, it would be so small, it would be virtually undetectable, which means it's not a falsifiable claim. He created a situation where you really can't prove that that's not true. You just have to trust the authority figures in that field. So in that case, I would also say, I trust the scientists that there isn't a little teapot orbiting the sun right this second. So Bertrand Russell, if you want to get a little further into the epistemological study of knowing. So for this last essay, just like life, you can't rely on common sense. You can't just point to one solitary source and say because they said so. It's a continuous process of qualitatively going through multiple sources at multiple levels, being honest with yourself about what pre-existing beliefs or biases you may have, and just trying to do as intelligent a job as possible of showing me that you're gathering information and approaching it from a variety of angles. That's one of the main recurring themes for the entire class. So the last essay is just one last opportunity to show that you can bring a lot of abstract, complicated ideas together and have an intelligent conversation about whatever topic you decide for the last essay. And that gets us to the end of part 2 of the Toad Theory mini lesson. As always, email me with questions, anything I can do to help with that last essay, please let me know. Otherwise, take care of each other out there, and we'll see you on the flip side.